Okay, so what if I told you that you, or maybe someone in your family, might actually be a Canadian citizen, and you don't even know it? We're about to go on a little investigation, a deep dive into your own family history, and trust me, what we find could change everything.
And look, this isn't just some crazy hypothetical question. For thousands of people, there's a hidden connection to Canada just waiting to be discovered, tucked away in old documents and family stories. So let's take a look at how that connection is usually made in the first place. Generally speaking, Canadian citizenship comes in two main flavors. The first one is super simple. You're born in Canada. Straightforward, right? But the second path, being born to a Canadian parent abroad, well, that's what's called citizenship by descent. And that's where things can get a little complicated, and where our investigation really begins. So, the most crucial thing to understand, the piece of the puzzle that trips up so many families, is a rule that used to be known as the first-generation limit. For a long time, this one single rule was the deciding factor for thousands of people wondering about their Canadian status.
So up until a very recent change, this rule meant that if your Canadian parent was also born outside of Canada, they generally couldn't pass their citizenship on to you. Essentially, the chain of citizenship was broken right after that first generation born abroad. But that is all changing.
So how do you even start this investigation? Well, your main tool, your official starting point for proving your claim, is the application for a citizenship certificate. You'll see it as Form CIT-0001.
And don't think of this as just boring paperwork. It's really more like a genealogical map that gets you to trace your own roots. The whole thing is designed to systematically build that link between you and a Canadian ancestor, step by step.
It actually guides you backward in time. You start with your own details, then you move on to your parents, and if you need to, you go back even further to your grandparents. The entire structure is set up to build a clear, documented line of descent.
And this is where you become a bit of a detective. You'll need to gather key clues about your parents and grandparents. Things like birth details, how they became Canadian themselves, and any proof you can possibly find, like old certificate numbers or records of them living in Canada. Every single piece of information helps build your case. But what happens when the paper trail just goes cold? When the documents you have aren't quite enough to convince the authorities? For a lot of people, this leads to a really unexpected and difficult roadblock, turning a paperwork exercise into something biological. You know, the official guidelines actually state that DNA testing should be a last resort, but for some families, it becomes a mandatory step. This usually happens when an immigration officer just isn't satisfied with the paper evidence you've provided, like birth or marriage certificates. And this requirement doesn't affect everyone equally. It disproportionately impacts families from parts of the world where getting high-quality documents can be much harder, maybe because of past conflicts or economic conditions. You can imagine, refugee families who might have had to flee without their papers are also heavily affected. And the financial burden is pretty significant. In one case, a father named Jean-Claude, who is earning a modest income and sending money home to his family, was suddenly faced with a bill of over $1,000 just to prove his relationship to his own children. This timeline really shows the human cost of these delays. I mean, take Amina's story. She spent the critical years of her childhood, from age 14 to 17, separated from her family, simply waiting for the bureaucratic process to unfold. It's a pretty stark reminder of how these delays can impact the most vulnerable people. But for those who hit this kind of dead end, there's been a recent and frankly massive change in the law. It's opened up a brand new path forward, and it's rewriting the rules for thousands of families all around the world.
This brings us to a real landmark moment. A new law, Bill C-3, has amended the Citizenship Act, and it has fundamentally changed the rules for children and even the grandchildren of Canadians living abroad, specifically addressing that old first-generation limit.
So this is the game changer. The old first-generation limit has been replaced with a new substantial connection test. What that means is citizenship can now pass to the second generation born abroad, as long as their Canadian parent spent at least 1,095 days, that's about 3 years, physically present in Canada before they were born. So, after navigating all the rules and gathering up all the evidence, what's the final prize? It's the official proof of your Canadian citizenship, the document that makes it all real.
And your proof comes in one of two forms, and they're both equally valid. You can get a traditional paper certificate or a modern electronic one, an e-certificate. And here's a quick way you can tell them apart just by looking at the certificate number. The paper ones start with a K, while the new digital e-certificates start with an X. And this certificate is powerful. It is the key you need to unlock a Canadian passport, to get a social insurance number, to access government benefits, and to use as official proof for things like getting a job. It's your gateway to all the rights and privileges of a Canadian citizen.
So it really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Could the story of your family be more than just history? With the rules changing, it might just be your own path to a new citizenship, one that's just been waiting to be uncovered.